anyone can be a tiny house builder. All you have to do is make a website, find some pictures, pop them on the website, and now you are a tiny house company, which is a huge problem because people don't check images. So a lot of what I've been trying to do in the past month or two through my channel is just get people to do a little bit more due diligence in sort of looking at different things.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and in this episode, I'm joined by Mick of Mick Talks Tiny, an expert in vetting companies, especially within the tiny house industry, to help us make more informed decisions. Mick shares invaluable insights on recognizing red flags, avoiding scams, and the importance of due diligence when choosing a builder. We dive into the transition of the tiny home market from DIY to professionally built spaces and the challenges around affordability and luxury. Mick also discusses their plans for a community-focused tiny home development and the necessity of honest consumer education in this ever-evolving industry. Stay tuned for an eye-opening conversation that will equip you with the knowledge to navigate the tiny home world more confidently going forward. But first, an announcement. This will be the last regular episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. After more than 300 episodes, I'm evolving my focus to help businesses grow through email marketing and podcasting, taking the skills and expertise I've developed here to serve others in new ways. While I may return with occasional episodes, the costs and time required for regular production no longer align with my current direction. I want to thank all of you who've been a part of this journey. Your support and encouragement have meant the world to me. If you'd like to stay connected or learn more about working together, you can reach me at ethan.waldman@gmail.com. All right, I am here with Mick. Mick is the creator of Mick Things Tiny on YouTube, where they focus on providing as many resources and information as possible to anyone looking to go tiny. Mick also works as a consultant for businesses in the industry, has worked as a tiny house designer, and has a background in sociology, public health, and psychology. They plan to create their own tiny house community in the future. Mick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So can you tell us how you got into tiny houses in the first place? Your background is kind of somewhere else and it's a cool background. So how does it all combine?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So my background is it's like my formal training, if you will, is actually in education. So I've been a professor for the past 10 years. And I've always been interested in anything related to housing. It relates to, the different things I've studied. Mm-hmm. In all those different areas. But just like everyone else, I got into tiny houses because of HGTV. So I've been watching HGTV for like 20 years. I'm an HGTV nerd. So I watched Tiny Luxury when that first came out. I fell in love with that. Mm-hmm. I was actually living in Portland at the time. So it was really cool to see a company that was local doing something so cool with tiny homes. And they just make sense to me in general. So it took, almost maybe 8 or so years, maybe like 7 or 8 years to get into the industry from when that show came out. But yeah, I started working as a designer in 2023 for a company, but I wasn't a big fan of their practices. So I actually knew I was going to quit. So I made the YouTube channel as a reaction to some of the things I had seen in the industry on the design side, mostly around people just being really trusting and giving people tens of thousands of dollars without fully vetting them and understanding what their money was going towards. So that's where Make Things Tiny in terms of the YouTube channel came about. I just wanted to talk about it. And I was hoping that, potentially I could shed light on the process and kind of go more behind the scenes in terms of like what it looks like to be a tiny house buyer, a builder, a designer, someone who lives in a tiny home. And that's sort of where the channel came about. And then the consulting piece, I just saw a need a few months into doing the channel to try to bridge the gap between, consumers and businesses. And so that's sort of where that's come about. So yeah, it's sort of like very roundabout, but yeah, mostly just because I've watched HGTV.
Nice. So what are some of those practices that, you were not happy with or that you didn't feel like aligned with your values when you were working for that company? And we don't have to name them if you don't want to.
Yeah. I can't actually say too much about it, but I think some of it is kind of been some of the things I've addressed in my videos that I've done more recently around
Yeah.
tiny house scams.
Yeah.
So I think the main thing that I learned working there is that anyone can be a tiny house builder.
Yeah.
Anyone can be a company, right? All you have to do is make a website, find some pictures, pop them on the website, and now you are a tiny house company, which is a huge problem because people don't check images. So a lot of what I've been trying to do in the past month or two through my channel is just get people to do a little bit more due diligence in sort of looking at different things. Because when you see a picture on a website and it says there's a tiny house company, they've got they've got like an address, they have
Right.
testimonials. I think you would never think all of that would be fake, but unfortunately, I've found multiple times that that's the case. AI generated testimonials,
Yep.
photos from tiny house companies that are no longer in business. So it's not really something that's super traceable. And so that's kind of, those are some of the things that I noticed. And it just didn't sit well with me. So even though I did get a lot out of working with the company on the design side, I got to learn about Tiny Easy's 3D design software, which I love, killing them. They're fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
It was just sort of a unfortunate entry into the industry in terms of seeing kind of like the dark side of it, where people would get to the design phase and meet with me and do like an hour consultation and still not have any idea what a tiny house was. So I was like, why did you already pay? Why have you already given someone a deposit when you're
Oh
not
my
really
gosh.
sure what this is? So I think those were some of the things that I saw, and I was like, oh wow, like this is problematic, because I do think it's on the builders and the companies to educate people, when they're coming in, about what a tiny house is and where it can go, and all these different things, and it's got to be more than just taking their money. And so that's kind of what I saw. It was mostly just about getting the deposit, and then whatever happens to them after that is it's not really on the company.
Yeah, that's kind of unfathomable to me to that somebody would get to the point of having given a deposit and not really even understand what it is that they're buying. Did they think that it was like can you say more about that? Like what were people thinking that they were getting?
I think they just saw, again, I think they just sort of like fell for the photos,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay.
I think they just saw a picture of a really cool design on a website and they're like, I think that would be great. A lot of people, they're not getting them for themselves sometimes. So
Hmm.
they're like, oh, this will be great for my kids, that are moving back home. Like, put this in the backyard, or, this will be a great rental. I can, bring in some extra income, or it could be a good home office in the back. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of people were going off of the aesthetic. Like they, first and foremost, they were like, it looks good. But when they get to the design phase, they're like, oh, like, what do you mean I can't have this here? Or what do you mean that the width is not actually, if it's a 36 by 10, it doesn't mean I actually have 10 feet of space, within the tiny house to walk. They don't, think about like no one told them about like, the walls width and how that affects how much space you
Sure.
have to work with. There's just a lot of nuances to that process that they weren't being informed about by the time they got to the design phase. So I think it's just a trust thing. I think people are
Yep.
very trusting, for better or worse.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it's creating a lot of problems in the industry.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I want to ask you actually because your channel's awesome. It's Mick Thinks Tiny. And some of your most popular videos are videos about, is this a scam or not? And you explore different companies, you explore like Amazon's tiny home and kit houses and various things that, may or may not be scams. And I'm curious, what are some of the criteria that you use to evaluate whether a tiny house company, is or is not a scam?
Yeah, sure. Those videos were fun to do in the sense of just like knowing that they were gonna help people and be informative.
Hmm.
It's always a risk to put content out there where you're questioning or encouraging people to question a process, or to
Yeah.
think more before they make a decision with a company, especially if it's a big company. But the main things I look for are whether or not, like, the website is kind of where I start. So
Okay.
first and foremost, if there's no website, that is a huge red flag to me, and that has been the case sometimes. So with the Amazon one, there was no actual website for that company. So there was an
Yeah.
Amazon page and nothing else. So that was a huge, like, kind of like tip off to me.
Yeah.
The other piece of things I look at are just the images on the website. So At this stage, since I've been doing this for, I had the channel since late January of this year is when I started it. I've seen so many different tiny houses from different companies that generally I can tell when the image I'm seeing is something I've seen somewhere else. So the images on the website is a huge one under the models section. So if a company is got like all these beautifully curated photos, they look super high end and professionally done.
Mm-hmm.
You got to do a reverse image search on those because oftentimes, unfortunately, you'll find that like there's someone else's tiny house. Like I've seen a lot of companies that are, I call it what it is. If they've stolen someone's photos, I just call it a scam. Like I have no problem calling it that.
Yeah.
Like Minimalist in Canada is one a lot of companies have been using,
stealing their images.
Yeah, stealing their photos. There was one where they were taking content from Tiny House Big Journey on YouTube's like blog. So like some of them were very blatant things. Like if you know these different models, then you would be aware of like, oh, that's definitely like that's a Timbercraft tiny home. Like there's no way that's their tiny house, like that sort of thing. And then the other piece of it's the agreement. That's a tough one because you don't have access to the contract on their website. But oftentimes in the Better Business reviews, the Google reviews, the Yelp reviews, people will be really forward about what's going on in the contract language. So there have been people who have said things around like there's no refunds, like don't sign this because there's no way you can get your money back.
Right.
So just a combination of all of those different factors are different things that I've done just to sort of see whether or not it's up to snuff, I guess, if you will.
I have spoken to several guests over the years who have been scammed in one way or another, having paid money for a tiny home and not gotten what they were expecting. Some of them catastrophically and some of them, there's a whole range. But I've noticed there's a real hesitancy. People don't want to speak out. They feel scared to speak out against these companies because they, have faced bullying online and have, the companies will go after people. Are you worried about that all? And have you heard of anything like that or seen anything like that?
So it was my original point of hesitation before I did the tiny house video with Incredible Tiny Homes, where I was like, the title is Incredible Tiny Homes a Scam? Like that was definitely like a point of like, okay, I'm probably going to get backlash for this.
Right.
But at that point, I felt like too many people had said things and there was too much information that I felt like I knew. And I felt like sitting on it was just unethical at that point. Like I think that my goal of my channel is to inform people, to help them make decisions about going tiny. I feel like I have a responsibility to provide them with any information I find or I hear about companies so that they don't lose 50 grand or 60 grand or 100 grand.
Yeah.
The company that I used to work for has recently filed for bankruptcy. And there's countless people who have gone to local news outlets to speak out against the company. And they're out, $65,000 or more, and they'll never see those homes. So I think initially, yes, for sure. And when that Incredible Tiny Homes video first came out, it blew up very quickly.
Yeah.
I think it has like over 1,000 comments on it. I knew a chunk of those comments were going to be like, you're going to get sued or, you're lying and coming at you. Like people do that. They attack your character. They attack you. They find anything about you as a person to attack so that they can feel better about, the discomfort, I guess, that you feel when someone says that someone you trust or something that you trust is potentially not in your best interest.
Yeah.
But what I've found is that the majority of those 1,000 comments are just people speaking out about their experience and feeling like they have the ability to do that because they're in like as safe of a comment section of the YouTube channel video page can be. So I think that it's a good thing. I think that if companies are going to go after people for telling the truth, that says a lot about those companies. I think at the end of the day, if you're doing something that's illegal, it's going to catch up to you. I don't think there's any way around that with social media and people talking and word of mouth. And so I see their fear and their hesitation. I was concerned too, but at the end of the day, I would much rather be upfront and just give people the information and let them decide. I'm never going to tell someone like, don't do it. Don't go to this company or that one. Like, unless it's like 100% is super clear that they're doing something, scammy or illegal, but I want to present the information. And I think that's the best thing that we can do is just present the info, have the conversation. But I totally see why they're afraid, because some of those companies they would rather pay money to shut them up
Yeah.
than change their business practices.
Yeah. Another one I've heard is that a company, will declare bankruptcy and kind of leave a lot of people kind of hanging and then start a new one. It's just like choose a new name, new LLC, and now you've got, you're back in business without all the commitments.
Yeah, that's a bummer. And also in the state of California, if a company files bankruptcy, there's only so much that you can do in terms of getting the money back. Like I think there's like a certain amount of money in the bond that they have to pay that potentially go back to people. But for for the Anchor Tiny Homes case, which is the ADU company here based out of California, there's hundreds of people. So of those hundreds of people, I mean, maybe each one of them will get like $5. Like they're not going to get the $100,000 back in a suit against the company. So they know what they're doing when they file bankruptcy.
Yeah.
They know that that's something where they're never going to have to pay that back.
Yeah. Well, another kind of topic area that I've seen you covering really well is new tiny home communities.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what you're seeing in that part of the industry? Like any trends or are you feeling hopeful about the tiny home community options?
It's an interesting space because I feel like every tiny home community, the new ones that are coming up are so different.
Yeah.
I think that when I first did one, I think it was with Tiny Tranquility up on the Oregon coast. And I'm just a huge fan of them. Like I love, Oregon, the Pacific Northwest. Anyone that knows me knows that that's like my favorite part of the country. That was a really cool video to do just to get people to, learn about one of the OGs that's doing it really well. They have like a 5-year waiting list. Like they're the epitome of what a tiny house, community is, and in my opinion should be.
Yeah.
But it's a range now with tiny house communities. Like there are developers, real estate developers, RV company developers getting into this space. So you have some that are like kind of just RV parks in a lot of ways. You have some that are smaller tiny house communities where, it has more of that like tight knit community feel. And then you have some of the ones that are just like larger. And some of them, the lot rent is like, I think that's the biggest thing I'm seeing is the lot rent range is so wide. Like you have monthly lot rents anywhere from $500 to $900 or $1,000 a month. So I think the industry is changing in that more and more people are getting involved and seeing the value in creating tiny house communities. I think that's just going to make things more expensive, the same way that more people getting into the industry and the industry being Instagrammable is what I call it, has made things more expensive too. So I think we have like more, it's just more tiered. You have like luxury tiny house communities in a sense, because, if you're paying $1,000 a month for lot rent, that's kind of a luxury market. So that's what I'm seeing. It's just, it's kind of just splitting in terms of the price and what you get for that money.
Interesting. So do you think it's, in a sense, it's like the same? It's like if you go out there and find someone to rent their backyard and strike a deal individually, that you can probably pay a lot less than if you're going to go to a tiny home community where everything is kind of put on a pallet for you. Like there's a hookup, there's a pad, there's trash collection, there's all this stuff. But do you think that it's a bad thing that there are like I'm just questioning the idea that with more tiny home communities that the prices they're going to go up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it depends on where you live, because here in California, I'm in San Diego, people are renting ADUs in people's backyards for like $2,800 a month. So you're not saving money. There's just no way to save money really in California unless you build your own house out of like sticks and you live on land that no one knows exists.
Yeah.
In other parts of the country, it might be more cost effective to buy a tiny house and put it in a friend's backyard. For sure, that might be more cost effective. But I think from what I'm seeing, the people that are gravitating towards tiny house communities, they really do want the community part. Like it's the community piece in the name that is what they want. They want to feel like they're part of the movement, and when they leave their place, they see that everyone that they're around is living in a tiny house.
Yeah.
They don't want to be in a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot home anymore or at all. So I think for that group, it's great that there's so many tiny house communities popping up in other parts of the country where we haven't seen them before. There's more happening in the Southeast. I think there's eventually we'll see probably more popping up in like New England,
Yeah.
In the Midwest too. So I think in that sense it's a good thing, but inevitably I do feel like it is driving up the prices because I think that if there's more demand, you can charge more. And because housing is expensive, I think as the median home price rises, what we consider affordable rises as well
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And median homes sit at 400 grand. So anything under 400 grand is now affordable.
Right.
I don't think it actually is, but that's just the language, unfortunately.
Right. I've noticed a trend, or I don't know if it's a trend. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but I'll just describe it, which is that you see a YouTube video, you see a YouTube tour of a tiny home, and the person says, okay, this tiny home costs $100,000. And then you get commenters saying, $100,000, that's insane. Like, this house should be $25,000. Or, or people see, they see a tour or they see an article where somebody DIY built their own tiny house on wheels and it's stunning and it's gorgeous and they used all reclaimed materials and they, it cost them $20,000 and like 3 years of their time. It creates an expectation that is what a tiny home should cost. And so you get this push and pull between what people think it should cost, what it actually does cost to build one and for a company to make a profit. And then that does open the door for these, kind of scam companies to then say, oh, I can build you one for 50, which is not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But then that kind of sucks people in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there's a question there.
For sure. Yeah.
I guess there was no question there. That was just my thinking.
No, for sure. I think that's the case. I think that was the case with the Amazon one. Like I saw an article and they were like, Amazon's got there's this new tiny house on Amazon. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Price, I think, was like 70,000 or something like that. But they had one on there that was gorgeous and it was for 49,000. The actual price of that home, because it was a minimalist home, I think was like closer to 80 or something like that. But yeah, so people just see the sticker and they see, okay, it's $30. There's a lot of Facebook groups where that's happening, where they'll show these beautiful park models for, $26.99 rent to own, like $26,000 rent to own. And you'll see all these people flooding in the comments like, this is perfect, the price is finally right. And then they're like, private message me if you want to find out more information. I'm like, that's a huge red flag, because it means that like there's some sort of bait and switch that's going to happen offline.
Yeah.
But yeah, people for sure, they think that they should get luxury for like 20K. And I don't blame people for wanting lower prices. It's about their wallets and their budgets. But I think people forget, and maybe it's because of the way this movement started. This movement didn't start out as like a bunch of businesses making a profit in a increasingly luxury market that's driven largely by social media. This was more about people that wanted to downsize, reduce their carbon footprint, travel, DIY, and that made sense in that price point. I think what people are experiencing now, I think they're just forgetting that these are businesses that have people on payroll that have to make a profit, and that the price of all the goods have gone up to make these homes. And I just don't think that's caught up.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think the industry is in a transitional phase right now. And it's, I think we're more on the far side of that transition, which is that the movement that kind of I joined and got involved with in 2012 was a very DIY thing. The majority of people were building their own tiny homes. And I think we've passed the halfway point a long time ago. And now I think we're probably 5-1, maybe 5-1 professionally built to DIY'd, maybe more. And this is all growing up while housing has, spiraled out of control. It's all really expensive. Tiny houses are a potential solution, but these companies and now communities are having to grow up and come into existence in order to support the movement. And as you just put so eloquently, like that there's payroll, there's people to hire to run these things, and that all costs money, and people aren't going to work for free.
Yeah, no. And I think also I did a video on this because I go back and forth. I'm
Yeah.
split on the idea of tiny homes as an affordable housing solution.
Hmm.
I think that DIY tiny homes in people's backyards with affordable overhead are a
Hmm.
affordable housing solution. I don't think that the mainstream setup we've got going on in this industry right now that caters to the Instagram and the social media crowd and
Yeah.
the luxury markets and the Airbnb market, I don't think that's a affordable housing solution. I think that is more than anything a distraction.
Mm.
We do see a lot of governments and cities putting millions and millions of dollars into creating tiny house villages for homeless communities.
Hmm.
But if you can set aside $10 million in your budget to build a bunch of like 8 by 10 sheds so that you can move the homeless community out of
Mm.
sight so that people aren't they're not uncomfortable by them anymore,
Yeah.
then you could probably do something with affordable housing. So I think that we're kind of in an interesting place right now where people are, it's just really split. I really do think there's like a bunch of different directions this industry is going, and I am really curious to see what happens in the next like 3 to 5 to 10 years with this industry because the consumers are upset. That's
Yeah.
what I'm seeing in my comments, and that's what I'm seeing is like people are upset. They think they're overpriced, and a lot of people are questioning whether or not it's worth it to
Mm.
continue to try to figure out a way to go tiny. So that's what I'm seeing, and so that's where I'm curious about what's going to happen.
Yeah. This really actually parallels what has happened in the home building world, in the non-tiny home building world,
Hmm.
which is that in 2008, when we had the kind of mortgage housing crash crisis, a lot of home builders went out of business, and the only ones that have come back are building luxury homes. And that we have a shortage of builders who are willing to build affordable, when I say affordable, I don't mean like by the HUD definition of affordable. I just mean like
Hmm.
non-luxury. And unfortunately, it all comes back down to capitalism, right? It's like
Hmm. It does.
it's like you can
Yeah.
make more money building a luxury tiny house, and charge $150,000 for it than you can by
Hmm.
building a really bare bones one that costs
Hmm.
$75,000.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate, but it's also it's such an interesting thing because it is partially driven by what the people want. Because every time you like and you comment and you share these images of like tiny homes that cost $200,000 to build, you are encouraging that side of the market.
Mm,
So I think it's tough because people do want quartz countertops and they want their rain head showers and their waterfall islands in something that's like 10 or 12 by 36 feet and they want them to be bigger.
yeah,
We're in this space now where tiny homes are not actually that tiny. Like people want like a 42-foot long tiny home that's like
yeah,
15 feet wide with a front porch and a fireplace. And I'm like, so it's kind of
yeah,
getting out of control in that sense. So you can't be like, oh, I want, a brick fireplace and a 16 by 40-foot tiny home, but I want it to cost $30,000 or I'm not going to buy it
yeah.
because that just doesn't make any sense. So it is weird, but yeah, I think to your point for sure. Like I think it is definitely more attractive to builders in this industry, even to build something that's high end or at least
Yeah.
it looks high end because they can make more money off of it, and they want to stay in business. We've seen tiny house companies go out of business. There's countless companies that have gone out of business because they're not making a profit
Mm,
before the pandemic and during the
yeah.
pandemic. So I think that's another issue too. We are losing companies in this industry as well.
Do you think that the tiny home industry is going to continue being tiny homes on wheels? And the reason I ask is that, I've always tried not to yuck anyone's yum in terms of like, if you want a 42-foot tiny house on wheels, a 10 by 40, that's 400 square feet. That's still very tiny compared to, your standard single family home. But I also think that at some point, and I'm going to say it's around in the like mid third, like probably upper 20s, low 30s, to me, it stops making sense to put the house on a trailer
Hmm.
for cost reasons, because that trailer is going to cost, $15,000 just alone. And just for transportational reasons that you are going to need to hire a semi truck to move it.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that the wheels are going to continue to be a focus?
I don't think so. I don't think the future of the industry involves tiny homes on wheels because I don't think people care about moving them as much anymore.
Yeah.
I think the percentage of people in this industry that are looking to go tiny because they want to move their home and
Mhm.
travel and they're remote workers and that sort of thing is not very big. I think the majority of people just want they want a smaller footprint and they want to put it somewhere and it's going to stay there, which is why I think park models are becoming more attractive as well too. And even some tiny house communities are creating communities where the homes are not on wheels. Like the focus is more on prefab homes that look kind of more
Mhm.
like a high-end ADU than they do like a traditional tiny home.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think with the prefab movement that is kicking off and it's kind of exploding, like it's more cost effective for a large company if they can build them to scale to just pump out a bunch of prefab ones that are not on wheels than it is to continue to make them and put them on wheels because for the most part no one really cares if they're getting moved anymore.
Yeah, I know that the prefab industry is taking off in California in a way that
Mhm.
it probably foreshadows what will be happening in the rest of the country.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that they'll like tiny house on wheels? Like, what like chunk of the industry of their market do you think will go towards them in the future?
I think that they're always going to be a big chunk of it, maybe not a majority chunk, as more
Hmm.
like developments get made, like pocket communities and like
Yep.
developments that are building intentionally smaller homes. But I still think the promise of the wheels is that you've disconnected the house cost from the land cost. And so it does make the ownership of a house more possible. And so I think that that's both a great thing and also a sucky thing because it keeps the person trapped in a rental cycle,
Mm.
because then they're having to rent land for that house.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
But I mean, you know, where I live, in Vermont, in Burlington, it's, a very small city. It's the biggest city in Vermont, but it's tiny. And just like so many other cities, there's not really any more room to expand out. And there's really not much, we're not going up yet. So I think that tiny homes on wheels are still such a great solution for doing infill, for saying, let's make it easier for people to host a tiny home in their backyard, which I know it's not really scalable, but it's also just another tool in the toolkit
Hmm.
that I hope that continues to get easier.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that's an important part of it. And also I do think that more and more people are, and I don't know what this is going to do to the industry, but more and more consumers are their primary concern is land ownership. So now
Yeah.
you are seeing people saying I don't want to move into that community because I don't want to pay lot rent. Like can I buy the land? I think that is a game changer for
Mm,
this industry to have communities where you can buy the land. And I think it's definitely going to present challenges, but I'm
mhm.
just curious about how that's going to shift things as well too.
Yeah.
Because that changes things, I think for sure. I think that will change the entire vibe of the tiny house community aspect of the industry too.
Yeah. It'd be like an HOA, you'd have like a condominium or townhome situation.
Basically,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Um, well, I really appreciate this conversation and kind of bouncing ideas back and forth. You mentioned in your bio that you plan to create your own tiny home community in the future. I'm curious, like what's your vision for that? Like what's the vibe? What's the how much community is there and how much I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, I've thought about it a little bit. I really want it to be smaller.
Hmm.
I think it's just be easier for me to manage.
Yeah.
But I do want to, because I do want to have the chance to kind of test it out and see what works. But I think for
Hmm.
me personally, smaller community would make more sense.
Yeah.
I don't want to take up too much space personally wherever I decide to buy land. Like
Yeah.
ideally, it would be in Oregon somewhere, and I don't want to take up too much space. But yeah, the focus would definitely be on community stuff and like hopefully like health and wellness things and like incorporating different things into the community. Like I'm vegan, so I would definitely try to incorporate things around like food and nutrition and just getting people a chance to like really connect with each other because that's kind of the main thing we're dealing with now, right? Like I
Yeah.
do feel like some people have mentioned that they've moved into a community, their main concern is like, well, are my neighbors chill? Like, what's the point of moving into a tiny house community if like when you step outside of your tiny home, you don't feel like you can talk to the people on the right or the left of you?
Mm,
Like, so I think that is a big piece of it that I would want to make sure, people feel comfortable and that they're actually interacting with each other. Because that's kind of the thing that we're all craving now, right? Like we don't talk to our neighbors anymore. Like we're increasingly isolated and more like just kind of defensive and reactive towards each other. We're just not
yeah.
trusting of each other anymore. So I would definitely want to create something where people actually feel like, they have a home and the people around them care about them and look out for them, and they're not, they feel safe. I think that would be the biggest thing. So I would think in order to do that, in my opinion, you kind of have to keep it pretty small.
Nice.
And I don't know if I would build the tiny homes. Like I don't know if I would want the tiny homes to be like you bring your own, or like just like there's certain ones there already. So like I'm not really sure how that would work. But yeah, that's kind of what I thought of so far.
Nice. Well, one thing that I like to ask all of my guests is, what are 2 or 3 resources that you recommend that you'd like to share with our listeners? It could be books or YouTube channels or social media accounts, or really open-ended.
Does it have to be? It could be anything. Like it could
Anything,
be
anything
at
that's
all.
inspired you or just helped shape your journey in the tiny home world.
I have 2 books actually right here. Where are they? This one. This one. Oh man. Okay, actually, this one is the main one I would say, which is it's just a picture book. I
Yeah.
actually had the author on the channel, which was really cool. But
Yep.
I actually really liked this one because I think sometimes we can like when we're scrolling through like Instagram and we're on social media, we're just kind of like flipping through photos of tiny homes so quickly. But tiny homes are really beautiful if you take the time to actually like just sit and look at them, like
Yeah.
not just like scrolling like super quick. So I really liked this book because it gave me like a bunch of inspiration in terms of like the design side of things. And also it gave you a lot of history about the different people, and it's global, like it's an
Yep.
international. So I really like this one. Tiny House, Live Small, Dream Big by Brett Heavener. That's a really great one.
Yep.
Let's see. And then this one I actually read when I first started like a while ago, like in the HGTV days,
Uh-huh.
The
Oh yeah.
Idiot's Guide to Tiny
Yep.
House Designing, Building, and Living. This one was really cool. I like the way that they talked about just their process and they broke everything down. I think this is a great book for anyone that doesn't understand some of the language around tiny homes
Yep.
and what it takes to build one, and why you would do certain things over others. Those would be the 2 that I would like. Let me think. I don't know if I'm thinking about YouTube channels or not, but yeah, those would be the 2 books. I like books. I know I'm a YouTuber and I'm on social media,
Yep.
like we all are. But at the end of the day, I love just reading a book. Like I love
Yeah.
paper still.
Yeah.
I'm actually not as big of a fan of digital and our digital world as you would think
Hmm.
based on what I do. But like, yeah, anytime I could read a good book and recommend it, I'll totally do that.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Mick Holiday for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes for this episode, including a complete transcript and links and resources at thetinyhouse.net/313. While this marks our final regular episode, the entire archive of over 300 episodes will remain available at thetinyhouse.net and on your favorite podcast platforms. If you've found value in our discussions over the years, I encourage you to explore the back catalog and share episodes with anyone who might benefit from them. Thank you all for being a part of this journey. I'm grateful for every listener who has tuned in and supported the show. You can stay connected with me at ethan.waldman@gmail.com as I move forward with new projects. This is Ethan Waldman signing off from the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.